everyone, this is Olga from the Forest Bathing Institute, and today we have Dr. Kirsten McEwan, and we are going to talk about nature-inspired self-care solutions when access and time are an issue. Hi Kirsten, it's lovely to see you today, and thank you very much for taking your time to participate in our podcast. So I'll say a bit about Kirsten. Dr. Kirsten McEwan is an associate professor of health and well-being at the University of Derby. She's happiest spending time in nature and was really pleased to be able to bring together her passion for the outdoors with her health and well-being research by becoming a forest bathing researcher. She's also a trained forest bathing guide with the Forest Bathing Institute, and most of her current research focuses on evaluating the effectiveness of forest bathing programs and making them accessible to wider audiences. So hi, Kirsten.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming to our podcast. So today we are going to talk about a little bit about things that people can do to help their self-care, nature-related solutions when access and time are an issue. But before we dive into it, I would love to ask you a bit about how you came to work with nature. So what inspired you to be interested in nature, to do your research, and to become a forest bathing guide?
It started quite early on for me. So when I was a child, my mum unfortunately had really severe postnatal depression and anxiety. So it meant that I had a lot of time alone, I suppose. And I spent a lot of my time out in nature. So there was a woodland in our village, and you'd have to walk across the village over a brook through a farmer's field, and then you're in this beautiful woodland. And I would just spend all day from dawn till dusk in this woodland. So I was incredibly connected to nature as a child, and it just felt like a place where I felt welcome and safe. And if I ever felt, upset about anything when I was at home, I'd either go to this woodland or I'd go to the conifer trees around the side of our house and climb up into them and just hide in the trees. And I just remember breaking the leaves and the little cones on the conifer and just smelling them and just feeling really comforted and safe. So I think my connection was very much early on. And then what tends to happen, unfortunately, with a lot of us is we get incredibly busy with things like schoolwork. So I'd say around age 12, schoolwork got so intense, and also you become incredibly aware of how you appear to other people. You become very self-conscious and where you sit in the social hierarchy. So I think that's probably why I became quite disconnected from nature at that point. And that disconnection lasted well until I'd finished my education, just because I didn't have time to go out into nature. There was all this academic pressure. But then I moved for work to Wales, and I ended up doing loads of conservation volunteering in my spare time, and it really reignited my nature connection. And I thought, I just want to spend all of my time outdoors, working with, I was doing a lot of volunteering on seabird colonies on the islands, and I just wanted to live on an island and just do loads of outdoor work. So I started to think about completely switching careers and becoming an ecologist. But then I had a job offer to look at how combining being in nature can benefit health and well-being, which is more of my research background. So I took that opportunity and have since discovered forest bathing through the Forest Bathing Institute. And I'd say training as a guide with you and Gary has really just taken my connection to a whole new level. If I thought I was connected before, it's like I'm super connected now. So I think forest bathing has really transformed that connection and really enriched it for me.
That's so great to hear, Kirsten. I mean, I'm sure the only thing we do is really remind people of how they were as children. But sometimes, it's good to have a reminder rather than just go on our own, because we know that sometimes we get lost in our thoughts or, worries. So Yeah, it's great that you got so much out of it, and it was really great to have you on the training as well. Thank you for sharing about that information, that, you know, we have this gap between being children and then things come on to, you know, social life and education and whatnot. I know there was a study with the University of Derby, correct me if I'm wrong, that normally nature connection drops from the age of around 11, 12, and then only rekindles at around the age of 30, which is a bit disturbing, I think, for many of us, knowing that how many potential health benefits there are to nature. And we know that nature is generally good for us. So actually, could you go a bit more into why it is good for us, which are the benefits, and how it actually helps us boost our well-being?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing because I think it should be obvious to all of us why spending time in nature would be good for us. And you shouldn't need researchers like me to go and prove that to people. But yeah, it's good for us in so many different ways. And I think when I first, you know, heard about forest bathing, it was through reading lots of research papers about how spending time in nature affects our bodies and our physiology. And I was just completely blown away by the number of research projects that showed that spending time in nature where you're really focused and connected through activities like forest bathing can increase what's known as our heart rate variability. So our heart rate, if we've got, our heart rate doesn't it's not like the second hand on a clock where it's sort of ticking regularly. There's variation between our heartbeats. And that variation tells us a bit about how well balanced our autonomic nervous system is. So we've got two basic systems. We've got a fight and flight system, which developed to keep us safe and protect us from threats. So, you know, if you see the tiger in the bush, your body responds by either getting you ready to fight or flight, so you run away. And I think we're all a bit too over familiar with that system these days because we have a lot of chronic long-term stresses. So it's not the tiger in the bush these days, it's more like the bullying boss at work who you can't get away from because you've got a mortgage to pay. And we're very good at keeping threats going. So as far as we know, a species that escapes the tiger in the bush doesn't go on to think, oh my God, what would have happened if that tiger had caught me and eaten me alive slowly and painfully? And what would have happened to my children? As far as we know, they don't replay the incident and think about all the terrible consequences. They just have a bit of a shake and get back to eating. Whereas our brains have developed in such a way that we can keep the threat going. So you might have had an argument with your boss, and you can be replaying that argument for 2 years, up to 2 years or more later, and just keeping yourself stressed. So I think, unfortunately, we have this tendency to be able to keep the threat going and therefore spend a lot of time in our fight and flight system. And we're also under this incredible pressure societally to be productive and successful and to always be on the go and be busy. And that's kind of known as our drive system. And that also sits very closely to our fight and flight system. So we spend too much time there. And what we often neglect is this other system called our rest and digest or parasympathetic nervous system, which all species go into when they're at rest and there are no threats in the environment. And it often is triggered mostly when we're asleep. So we get most of our kind of rest and digest parasympathetic in sleep. And what the research with forest bathing has shown is that when we forest bathe, we go more into our parasympathetic or rest and digest system. And that's shown in an increase in our heart rate variability, which shows we've got a better balance between that fight, flight and rest and digest. We need both in our lives, but it would be nicer to be able to spend more time in that rest and digest. And I was just blown away by the amount of evidence that showed forest bathing can take you into that sort of rest and digest system. And it also affects us in surprising ways. So just being under the trees and breathing in the sort of air around the trees has been shown to really increase our immune system activity. So there was this really funny study that they did in Japan where they took some Japanese businessmen and put them in a windowless hotel room for about 3 days. And they just pumped in the chemical smells of the forest. So these wood essential oils that are otherwise known as phytoncides, or some people call them organic, volatile organic compounds, that they're essentially wood essential oils, and they pumped that smell into the hotel room and then took blood tests from the businessmen and found that their anti-cancer protein numbers and activity increased by up to 50%. So just kind of being under the trees and doing lots of slow breathing can really help with giving us this incredible immune boost. Yeah, and it just really, the whole sort of being in the forest, being guided by a forest bathing guide, it's an opportunity to slow down, be mindful, to not be in your head and your thoughts and your kind of rumination about that argument you had with your boss, or what you've got to do next at work, or it gives you a complete break from that, and that's really important. So it can really help improve your mood as well, and kind of switch off some of that rumination and anxiety that we often encounter.
I mean, even though I come from the Forest Bathing Institute, rehearing all this information is so incredible. And I think our bodies are so smart, and they do know how to rebalance themselves given the natural conditions if we don't push ourselves too hard, if we don't go too much into the hustle. And I mean, it's amazing to me to hear again how our immune system responds just to being in nature, not even being guided. And then, of course, there are benefits to being guided, like you are in a forest bathing session. So to me, it's incredible. And I think, as well as you, I got drawn to such a big potential of nature, nature's benefits to human health and well-being. They're really, you discover every day something new, something exciting. But I think we all can at least pick a few benefits that we might want to have from being in nature. I mean, most of us suffer, I think, in the Western world, suffer from doing too much, or maybe rumination of thoughts, a bit of anxiety, stress. So these are all amazing potential benefits that we can get if we can get into nature. But of course, there are some situations where nature is either not accessible, or, as we talked about, some periods in your lifetime when you might not be as engaged with nature as you would otherwise because of time or other constraints. I mean, of course, there is a financial constraint, which we hope to help people with by providing sessions through the charities and social prescribing. But today I wanted to focus more about accessibility and time. So what if, unfortunately, the study shows that most studies show that nature is in areas that tend to be more privileged. And so nature access, excuse me, in a way it can be a privilege for some. And as well as time, having spare time to go into nature to experience that due to the busyness of life. So I don't know whether you have come across certain situations from your experience being, teaching at the university and doing research where you found certain situations were impacting this accessibility or time. And maybe you found certain solutions that could help people who lack accessibility or time, or maybe both.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, in the UK, we only have about 13% tree cover, and only 2% of that is classed as natural or ancient woodland. And often that woodland tends to be in the wealthier areas. So if you're living in an income deprived area, getting out into a good quality green space where you feel safe and you're not at risk of encountering antisocial behavior or just something that's upsetting, like, seeing lots of litter, it becomes quite challenging. And you might not have the means to travel out to those really nice, good quality green spaces. So it becomes a case of trying to make the best of what's on your doorstep. And really, with the busy lives that everybody's leading these days, if you can find a good place on your doorstep, whether that's your local park or even admiring the greenery in your neighbours' gardens, you know, as you walk past their front gardens, or if you've got your own garden, you know, it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a big, wild, natural area for you to still get some of the benefits of forest bathing and really noticing and being connected. I mean, in my work at the University of Derby, I mean, as academics, we've all got this reputation for working just crazy hours, and there's a big pressure on us to always be seen as very busy and productive, and trying to get my own work colleagues to come out with me on a lunch break to do a forest bathing session is incredibly challenging, and the only way I even stand a chance of getting them to turn up is if I do it in the park opposite the university. So I think it's making it more accessible to busy people or people who don't have access to that good quality nature. You can do it in a park, a garden, but just taking people out where it's a very short walk for them to get there. So for my colleagues, it's a 10-minute walk. We're in the park, and instead of doing the 2.5 hour forest bathing session I'd normally do, I cut it right down to 1 hour, because that's what's feasible for a lot of my work colleagues. And the same is true of my students. I was talking with some of them the other day about how can I attract students to these sessions, because I'm getting nobody coming. And they all have said to me that, you know, you would not believe the academic pressure we're under, how we're constantly fed this idea that if you don't do well in this exam, your life is over, you're never going to get a job. So they were saying it's like the relentlessness of coursework and exams, the constant pressure means that to do anything that's considered not work makes them feel incredibly panicked and guilty. So cutting it right back to 1 hour or even less makes it a lot more accessible for people. And if it's on their doorstep, it's more likely they can get there, but also it's more likely that they'll continue practicing because they'll realise, oh, I can do this in my own garden or my park. So they can build it into every day. And I think giving them the message as well that it doesn't have to even be an hour, 20 minutes in nature each day, that there's research to show that that's really beneficial to our mental well-being. And if you don't have 20 minutes, start with 5 minutes and just work up from there. But I'd say trying to build it into your daily routine, so it's not like another thing that you add to your to-do list and go, oh God, how am I going to find an hour to do forest bathing? If you try and just work up to it like 5 minutes a day and weaving it into what you're already doing, then that's, I think, how you can make it more feasible and sustainable. And I've been given some great ideas by people who've been on some of these walks. So for example, there's a lady who goes running every day, and the last 10 minutes of her run she now puts aside to forest bathe and just wind down from her run. There was a guy who came along and said, well, I have to take my kids to school and then I'm off to work. So he's now getting up 10 minutes earlier, taking a longer, greener route to the commute to school with his kids, and just they're stopping and noticing things on the way. Some of my students are taking a break from their screen. So I'm looking out my window now and I'm using one of the techniques you showed me where I look into my foreground and just notice what's there. So I can see one bush and I might be noticing the different colours and textures, any movement, the way light falls on it, and then moving into middle distance and further out. And that's actually a really good rest for my eyes as well while I'm working in front of the screen, just to look up every 5 minutes, you know, just for 5 minutes every, I don't know, 2 hours, say, and just do that exercise. And the benefit is that I'll come back and I'll be more productive at my job. So that's kind of, for anyone who's busy, that's the sort of message that you need to give them as well, is that it's not realistic for us to be productive for more than 4 to 5 hours a day. There's research to show that. So taking these breaks will actually bring us back refreshed, more awake, and probably more creative and productive at what we were trying to do anyway. So it's only going to make us more productive.
And that's, I think, very exciting for all the students, academics, or busy people to hear, because, excuse me, we always think that we have to just work full on to actually have a new result. but in a way we can have better results if we take little breaks now and then. And as you said, the solution of taking just a look outside the window and focusing on different layers of textures and colors, it could be even quite a big impact, even if you do it just for a couple of minutes and then come back to your work. So that's actually amazing, and I think that's quite a feasible thing for many people to do. I would say if you were to summarize the whole thing up for people who have maybe little to no experience with nature, are very low on time and don't have much nature accessibility around them, or very little, what would be your 3 top tips for them to start connecting with nature?
So building it into what you're already doing and keeping it short to begin with. So like I mentioned, just that exercise of looking out of your window at your view and just looking into different depths of view. If you don't have any trees outside, if you can at least see a bit of sky, you could just notice the colours of the sky or the shapes and movement in the clouds. So just giving yourself, maybe set an alarm on your phone, and every 2 hours just admire a view out of a window and really spend time with them. You can also bring nature into the home. So I'm looking at my desk and I've got, I go out on walks and I bring back little treasures that I found. So I've got a feather from a little egret here, and I've got woodpecker feathers, a piece of wood that smells really good, leaves. So I'd say having a little nature collection of items in your home just for you to interact with every so often is a really nice thing to do. And I also have, you know, I mentioned phytoncides and those wood essential oils at the beginning. Next to my bed, I've got a diffuser, and I have pine and cedar essential oils. And I set that for half an hour before I go to bed. So I've got the smell of pine or cedar just before I go to sleep. So that's another way that I'm kind of exposing myself to nature and getting some benefits. So I think that's 3 tips. Yeah, setting an alarm and looking at a view out of a window. Bringing home some nice natural objects that have grabbed your curiosity and just taking moments throughout the day to look at them and appreciate them. And then having the diffuser next to your bed or next to your desk, so you've got the nice smells of the wood essential oils, which will probably be giving you a bit of an immune boost as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll be taking the tip to put the diffuser by my bedside during just before going to sleep. That's an amazing tip. Thank you so much. So I think we will wrap it up for today. Thank you, Kirsten, for your time. And just wanted to add this interview with anything you would like to share on your work. Maybe you would like to share where we can find more about what you do and your current projects or your past projects, anything you're going to work in the future. If you could share just a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so you can find most of my research papers on Google Scholar. If you just type in McEwan and forest bathing. I've had a few papers published recently, so I've looked at forest bathing with adults, forest bathing with children, and then forest bathing with some groups who really struggle for access, like adults with long COVID who don't have the energy or the mobility to get outdoors into nature. So I've done some research with some other forest bathing guides who only deliver their forest bathing sessions online through photos and videos. So I've got that research stuff coming up. I've got papers coming out with you and Gary looking at forest bathing with adults with mental health issues and learning disabilities. And I'm also doing some work with some colleagues in Canada who are delivering online forest bathing sessions for people with really long-term chronic mobility issues, a lot of whom are bedridden, so they can't get out into nature. So we're looking at how watching nature videos and being guided mindfully can help with their nature connection.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. And it's amazing to hear how much you're doing for, you know, connection of health, between health and nature. And I'm sure all these papers are very helpful. I know, to what we do currently at the Forest Bathing Institute, and I'm sure will be very helpful for policies and reaching those people who need it the most, including people with little to no access to nature and little time, busy people. So thank you a lot, Kirsten, for today. And I hope to see you maybe again on the podcast. And thanks again for all your time. Thank you.
Bye.
Oh.